uniforms and various other things. And so I think that one, again, that's why I'm so supportive of allies and lashing up with it with our cadet education, because I think a lot of these things generationally, if you can start learning these now and you can begin to understand and speak a similar vernacular and begin to bridge those divides, then you don't end up having the problems that I see among my peers, my colleagues, and sort of what goes on at that level. So what I hope to do here is get you 2 vantage points from people who spend time within that sphere. And again, having known them personally and professionally and through other recommendations, I think they've innovatively found ways to go ahead and do that. So we'll start with Mina Chang, who's the CEO of Linking the World. She'll highlight some of her programs and things she's doing, both in the world of unmanned aerial vehicles, particularly, as well as some of the other things she's done with some programs with the Navy in response to humanitarian assistance and disaster responses all over the world. She has an appreciation sort of from that, from what a very large administration, enterprise at the federal level can do, and how we can work bridge across those things. So we'll start with Mina, let her present, and then afterwards we'll go to Melissa and we'll go to Q&A. So please, Mina, thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. It's such an honor and a privilege to be among such high caliber leaders that are working to address the challenges and the opportunities in coordinated humanitarian action, especially looking at the relationship between civilian and military actors. I personally truly believe that these relationships will lead the United States and the world into a more stable and secure, resilient future. I serve currently as the CEO for an international humanitarian aid organization called Linking the World. We were founded in 1997 and currently operate in 43 countries. And we're headquartered in the great country of Texas. We operate in disaster zones, conflict zones. We're in places like Somalia, Kenya, Myanmar, a school in Afghanistan, and we work in developing nations as well. So in our world today, 1 in 8 people still live in extreme poverty and experience extreme hunger. Now, outside of the humanitarian imperative, we understand that this contributes to instability and is a breeding ground for conflict. So in our world today, as an organization, we understand that we must be open to new models for collaboration, cross-sector collaboration, and advanced response methodologies. And for us, it's a high priority. So coordinated civil-military operations in a disaster zone is very different from an armed conflict zone. In the field, you'll realize that the very same NGOs that are so willing, excited to collaborate with you in a disaster zone will do a seeming about-face in a conflict zone. And so I'll keep this in the context of responding to natural disasters. So I have kind of a wide spectrum of experience in the space, not only coming from a military family, but I'm the child of 2 commanding officers in the Salvation Army. So that childhood exposed me to the entire economic spectrum. It immersed me in the social programs, world missions around the world, a lot of disaster response operations just because of the inherent work that my parents did. But I was able to see firsthand the value of these long-term trusted relationships that NGOs had with communities all around the world. And then when disasters would hit these communities, I saw the incredible value that these NGOs brought to the military actors that would come in with all these capabilities. The NGOs not only had embedded relationships, they knew the people, spoke the language, knew the infrastructure, physical, political, so they were able to help the first responders navigate very quickly, efficiently. And not only that, were they the first responders, so were their local partners. Go ahead. My personal career with Linking the World, this organization, actually started with a civil military operation after the earthquake in Haiti during Operation Unified Response. And since then, every crisis that Linking the World has responded to has had some component of civil military coordination, most notably with the Philippines, during the response for Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines, and just last week I was in Vanuatu working with our Australian military counterparts, learning quite a bit about how differently their military response works, and working through their Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Vanuatu was hit with the Category 5 storm that destroyed over 95% of all the homes in the country. So why do NGOs like ours coordinate with the military? Well, theoretically, coordination would help reduce redundancy and duplication in efforts. We should be able to leverage assets and relationships and we'd like to ensure a transition into a longer-term developmental phase. The last thing we want to do is take people from one cycle of extreme poverty or disaster zone straight into another cycle of dependence on aid. And then there's, the problem of military actors in uniform being the first delivery of aid and then seemingly abandoning the people when they withdraw. So we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. Also, some NGOs who believe that true neutrality is a farce will argue that the imperative for coordination is really a national security issue, that if we do not act in a post-9/11 world, then we're leaving a space for extremist groups to come in and target vulnerable populations in order to influence with their ideology. We all know the famous words of former Secretary of State Colin Powell, who called on NGOs to be force multipliers. And the most recent State Department's diplomacy review reported that NGOs are acting more as an influencer in international affairs. Personally, I've seen it happen in the field. I'll give you two examples. We work with a refugee population in Myanmar. The Rohingya people are ethnic minorities. They are a burden to the host nation, and we have a very small program there. But we've seen quite organized non-state actors coming in, giving aid in the name of their ideology. So you can see the danger inherent in groups coming in and influencing vulnerable populations have very little or nothing to lose. After Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines, we know of specific communities that are sympathizers of extremist groups, literal training grounds for insurgents deploying around the world. And we've seen foreign aid that have come in that have reached those communities, giving lifelines to groups like that. And whether it's in the name of true humanitarianism, I'm sure that as people working for the Department of Defense, that's not an ideal situation. So we do this because we see the value in creating a dialogue with more permanent NGO missions on the ground who can help with things like cultural awareness, attention to the long-term consequences, and consideration on how to increase a population's sense of security and progress in the community. So that being said, through working with many other NGO agencies and military groups, I seem to hear a familiar frustration during every disaster response operation. Of course, duplication of efforts and the redundancy of work that's being done. So time wasted, lives lost, a lot of donor dollars wasted because of that. The lack of understanding from NGOs on how the military operates, your mandates, and a lot of NGOs seem to have a lot of unreasonable expectations of access to your military assets during times of disaster. And then on the other side, a lack of understanding from the military on the mission objectives of NGOs, and not understanding why even we can't seem to coordinate with one another in a disaster situation. And of course, the important issue of the compromise and preserving of neutrality in a space. Go ahead. So part of our package of solutions for the future is how we can leverage from the examples and the standards that have been set by the U.S. military. In a lot of instances, the last thing we really want to do is to go against the policies and procedures that have been put in place to protect your processes. So I can't think of a better example than than one of our own programs. It's called HALO. HALO stands for Help and Locate Operations, and it's our use of UAVs in a disaster response situation to obtain situational awareness through imagery, analytics, and data. Can we get sound on that? You know, after every disaster, the Department of Defense are able to deploy their UAV assets and satellite imagery to gain high-quality crisis maps. And usually those outputs are classified. So by the time that first responders and NGOs get to those, either the data is outdated or we're not really able to obtain it. So we tasked a team within our organization to create a way that we can get our own imagery so that we can share it with first responders and help coordinate relief efforts in real time.
Cole, you got to check in on SATCOM with Jada?
Affirm, my radios. Jada Petty, Machete 1-2 checking in as fragged.
Machete 1-2, copy as fragged.
Jada, we're assuming hybrid until Salsa comes up on station in approximately 20 miles.
Machete 1-2, copy, be advised. We also have medevac pay folks on 10-minute alert out of Port-au-Prince.
Machete 1-2, copy, and en route our grids India 02 through India 05.
Hey, you see that down there? Who's got that grid?
According to the airspace control order, Foxtrot 04 is assigned to that NGO Halo. They got cleared for very low ops through the Civil Military Operations Center. They're equipped with those small drop-capable drones operating out of multiple locations around the island. There's one in that small open area about 3 miles off our right wing.
Okay, cool. Call it into Jada for passing the Halo ops.
On it. Jada Petty, Machete 1-2, in-flight report. Say when ready to copy.
Machete 1-2, go with in-flight report.
Jada, Machete 1-2, current grid location. Echo 04, 2,500 feet. Current observation, multiple downed power lines, washed out roads, multiple people in the area moving north. Request pass to Halo Ops, status of Echo 04. Recommend priority investigation Echo 04 and surround. Using Halo UAS for real-time sequencing of aid.
Machete, copy all. We'll relay to Halo Ops. Hey, from all the reports I've heard, those Halo Ops guys have been all over this mission. On time, on target, right down in the weeds. Real force multipliers for this mission.
I heard say we could use the help getting our grid percentages up there.
Even in post-disaster scenarios, UAVs can do things like we can put an infrared and thermal imaging to mitigate the spread of disease by measuring high-grade fevers in a refugee camp, or we've been using it to detect landmines, and now we're looking to try to clear landmines. And of course, if we empower local communities that are high risk, we can really help them with their disaster preparedness initiatives. And then with UAVs, a scenario of a great civil-military partnership could be exploring the use of decommissioned governmental assets, such as like the KMAX or the Ares platforms, which would help NGOs like ours raise our payload capabilities. I think KMAXs can carry like 5,000 pounds. Right now, drones that I know of that any NGO can operate carries about 50 pounds. Go ahead. So the importance here is the appropriate use of capacity and capabilities, both sides understanding the principles in which we operate. Humanitarian groups, we strive to adhere to the core principles of neutrality, impartiality, operational independence. What's clear is that with the constant rise of political instability, poverty, and natural disasters, I believe we must work together to stand united in the face of more frequent and complex humanitarian emergencies. And I see this as an opportunity for us to not only continue saving lives, but to, as we share these friendships and relationships around the world, to foster peace.